Welcome to the France 24 debate. Donald Trump has said it many times. Tariff is his favourite word, the most beautiful word, he says. Well, let's listen to how Donald Trump himself said it exactly. These coming up now, his words from November the 3rd in North Carolina.
Look, I had a lot of tariffs. I took it. The most beautiful word in the dictionary to me is tariff.
There we have it from the man himself, as they say. But the tariffs that Trump is imposing now on business and commerce across the borders is having a less than beautiful effect. Trump came to power promising prosperity for the United States, a new golden age, he said. Now the country is teetering towards recession. Is this a lose-lose situation where Trump's tariffs provoke a similar response from penalised countries? Certainly that's the pattern we're seeing emerge. Caught in the middle, as always, consumers, who always seem to suffer when people in power want radical change. Our panel to discuss the issues here in the studio, Chunyan Lee, writer and founder of Fader Consulting. Chunyan, always a pleasure to see you, and thank you for joining us here in the studio. On the other side of the set, but not necessarily against, but we'll see how things emerge. Andre Lossakrug-Pietri, who is the chairman and scientific director of the Joint European Disruptive Initiative, which you refer to as JEDI?
Yes.
We might need a Jedi's power to actually unravel this whole tariff issue.
You need to be on the good side of the force, right?
May the force be with us all. Thank you, sir, for joining us. We have joining us from, I believe it is Chicago, Ryan Young, senior... Excuse me, I've mistaken my place. I can see now, Moshe Lander. Moshe, good evening to you, sir. You're in Calgary, Canada, senior lecturer of economics at Concordia University. Thank you for being with us, sir. And the guest I was about to introduce, Ryan Young, is expected to join us very shortly. Before we let our panel loose discussing the issues, let's take a look at this report by Luke Schrager.
The transatlantic trade spat escalates again, and this time it's alcohol in the firing line.
The European Union has just put a nasty 50% tariff on whiskey. If this tariff is not removed immediately, the U.S. will shortly place a 200% tariff on all wines, champagnes, and alcoholic products coming out of France and other EU-represented countries.
That 50% import duty is itself a response to Donald Trump's own tariffs on steel and aluminium. The European Union stated on Wednesday it would allow levies on 26 billion euros worth of U.S. products, previously suspended, to come in on April 1st. Despite the mounting trade war, Brussels has left the door open to negotiation.
We are prepared for whatever might come, and we have been preparing for over a year. We want to be very, very clear on this, that the EU is not part of the problem here, and the suggestion that we are part of the problem is deeply misguided. We believe that we should be working with the US to be part of the solution.
EU wine exports to the United States were worth nearly 5 billion euros last year, according to statistics agency Eurostat. Nearly a third of its total wine exports globally, with France and Italy making up the majority. The sector saw a major slowdown last time Donald Trump was in office, with far less extreme tariffs in place. Elsewhere, though, on another front of the trade war, Canadians have come up with their own solution when it comes to alcohol. Simply boycotting American spirits, among other products. But in the meantime, Europe's alcohol industry faces an uncertain future.
Luke Schrager setting the scene. Let's go straight to Canada, Calgary, Canada. Moshe Lander is there, senior lecturer of economics at Concordia University. Moshe, our report really focusing on the issues as it's affecting Canadians. We saw on the shelves there the sign, "Buy Canadian instead." How are things starting to bite where you are? Can you give us a sense of the feeling among consumers and analysts like yourself?
So the feeling among Canadians in general is that we've been betrayed. For 80 years, since the signing of the GATT in the 1940s, Canada and the US have moved in lockstep towards trying to liberalize trade around the world, but certainly with each other. And what started out as an auto deal to try and integrate our auto industries, it expanded to a more broad free trade agreement between the two countries, which eventually expanded to a broader free trade agreement that included Mexico, creating an integrated North American market. The thought that the Americans could stab us in the back was unthinkable until about a month ago when Trump started making these announcements. We didn't even take him seriously during the election campaign. So Canadians now are looking to try and do whatever we can to land a punch against what we view as our big brother, who's now turned into a bullying big brother. And Canadians are now referring to the idea of using our elbows as a way to signify hit them where it hurts.
GATT, General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. I've just looked it up. 1948 it was signed. Clearly, as you say, there's a whole generational thing here of cooperation, of trade going very smoothly between the countries, but Trump really seeking to disrupt all of that.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what's behind it. I heard your clip where you were saying that tariff is his favorite word. And I will say that Trump has been in the public eye in North America for 40 years. He was a property tycoon in the 1980s, and he was maybe a Kardashian before Kardashians were such a thing. He was famous mostly for just being famous. But the one thing that he's always been consistent on in those 40 years in the public eye is he does not like free trade. Whatever it is, he sees it as a zero-sum game, which is fundamentally flawed logic. But he does not like it. He's flip-flopped on every major issue. He's been a Democrat, he's been a Republican, he's been an independent, and now he's a MAGA Republican. But he's always stuck to the idea that he doesn't like trade. And so the fact that he's now trying to gum up a system that's worked very well for both countries for decades is shocking on this side of the border, at least.
Moishe, thank you very much indeed. We'll get back to you as soon as we possibly can. We now have from Chicago Ryan Young, senior economist at the Competitive Enterprise Institute. Ryan, give us your take on the situation, because we're hearing from some sides of the argument that what Donald Trump is doing is disrupting commerce and business to such an extent that is pushing the US towards a recession. Then on the other side, of course, you'll get Trump supporters who will say that there'll be a little bit of short-term pain for long-term gain. Give us your take.
It's pretty similar to Moishe's, actually. Trump's are all pain, no gain. They're a self-harming policy. We're damaging perhaps the closest diplomatic relationship we have with one of our biggest trading partners. We're resparking inflation fears. And for what? For nothing. It's not going to create jobs in America. It's not going to enhance our foreign policy objectives. We've seen what's happening in financial markets. This is a misguided step. And President Trump, like Moishe said, the guy just likes tariffs. He will rationalize them any way he can, and we could be in for another 4 years of pain.
Trump has been pointing out that what he's planning to do is to create, I think he's referred to blue-collar jobs in places along the Rust Belt to sort of reactivate factories and get production happening again in the US. Are you saying that this is something that really cannot happen with his policies?
No, and one reason for that is that US manufacturing capacity is actually at an all-time high right now in 2025. And when manufacturing output hit its all-time high, that was September of 2018. It wasn't back in the 1950s when you had the big three auto companies dominating the landscape. It wasn't in the 1970s when manufacturing employment peaked. It was 2018, which was right when Trump's first-term tariff started to take effect. It took a nosedive after that, hurt further by COVID. It's been struggling back since, and now we're going to see another retrenchment from the tariffs.
Ryan Young, for the time being, thank you very much indeed. That's Ryan Young, senior economist from the Competitive Enterprise Institute. Let's come to the studio. We have two guests waiting to join the debate. Chunyan Lee from Fader Consulting. Yeah. I'm coming to you last, if you don't mind, because I sense we need to get this gentleman to give us his sense of things. Andre Lossokrug-Pietri of the Joint European Disruptive Initiative. We've heard how these things are affecting Canada. Obviously, Europe is being affected too. What is your take on the situation? Is Trump right to be doing what he's doing, or has he got the wrong end of the stick?
Well, we're seeing probably a double shock. We had the shock in Europe in the last 2-3 weeks when allies in Europe realized that, the US might not be anymore the big brother protecting them. So there's this defense shock. And now what is the bread and butter of the European Union, which is free trade, because again, it's the largest exporter in the world. It's a market which has always lived from open markets. And so this is a shock. The question for Europe is, will it have both the guts to react very boldly, which we didn't do, for example, in the bullying about Greenland. So probably that might be a lesson for us. That was just a couple of weeks ago. But on the other side, if we escalate, we saw that the reaction of Donald Trump on the 50% on whiskey is a 200%. So there's a kind of a exponential escalation. I think the big question for the Europeans, will they be able to talk to different stakeholders within, I would say, the American environment, business circles, which we saw, especially with the stock market, already some signs of weaknesses. I mean, there are increasingly, I was in New York a couple of days ago, there's granted it's a democratic stronghold, and even if Donald Trump comes from there, he's not very loved in the Big Apple. But you see business circles, which were the first ones to flip. Remember, the chairman of J.P. Morgan, the CEO of J.P. Morgan, was the first a year and a half ago, who said, well, actually, Donald Trump might not be as bad for business. Well, people begin to realize that actually what he's doing right now is extremely unwise for the U.S. first and foremost. So I think, will Europe be strategic? It has not shown to be like that. Will it avoid overreaction? And on the other side, will it act collectively? That's the big question. We'll see in the next couple of days.
Andre, thank you for basically panning out how this debate is going to go. Thank you very much indeed, Andre Losa-Krug-Pietri. Chunya, can I bring you in to talk about, because I always ask you to come and talk to us about China specifically, but on the broader issue of tariffs in particular. What's your view of that? I mean, tariffs, I think we're hearing from our guests, not necessarily a good thing, but some countries clearly feel they have to be protectionist. How do you see the situation?
I think today the economies of different countries are all interconnected, and the trade should benefit different countries. If each country try to be protectionist against other countries, then we will have many more conflicts. And the principle of the free trade, established, especially since 1947, is that we should, do the trade and develop the free trade with other countries in a peaceful manner and to benefit different countries. And this will be a win-win situation for different countries. But today, the tariff increase launched by Trump against other countries make us afraid that this will be a really lose-lose situation for different countries, not only for China, but also the EU countries, Canada, Mexico, etc. And, in 2018, Trump already launched the trade war to China. And we see that it hasn't brought significant benefits to the USA. And this has harmed the relationships between both countries. So I think we need to stay open, to the free trade principle and continue to develop business with other countries, especially that today we face lots of challenges on the global economy, on the environment. Also, and we need to collaborate to development the technologies on the AI and all other technologies. Yeah.
Indeed, you touched on a number of issues there in which Donald Trump is making U-turns, especially the environment. Let's just take a listen to what Donald Trump was saying in the White House just a few moments ago. He sat alongside NATO's Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which, of course, America's been a huge part of that since 1949. And now, of course, people are saying that the US seems to be withdrawing from that. Certainly the words that Trump is coming out with suggest that is the case. Rutte is there to try to mend that relationship and try to get some kind of accord on what happens in Ukraine. But Donald Trump, of course, took advantage of that situation to talk about other issues. Let's hear what he had to say about the relationship currently, tariff-wise, with Canada.
Any chances that you will ban on the tariffs on aluminum and the ones that are planned for April 2nd?
No.
You are not going to change your mind?
No, not. Look, we've been ripped off for years, and we're not going to be ripped off anymore. No, I'm not going to bend at all. Aluminum or steel or cars. We're not going to bend. We've been ripped off as a country for many, many years. We've been subjected to costs that we shouldn't be subjected to.
Aluminium, say it however you wish. What it amounts to is that this is going to cost a lot more. And can I bring you back in, Moshe Lander from Concordia University. The US has been ripped off for years. That's what Trump is saying.
Sure. He fundamentally misunderstands the whole idea of free trade. I often have to explain to people that free does not mean that there is no price that's charged. Free just means that it's voluntary. So it's not like Canadians are being sneaks and underhanded people by dumping our goods and services at the US border. We're selling it to them. American consumers, American businesses want what we're offering. They're paying market prices for it. There's no disadvantage that's occurring to the US from buying our stuff. The fact is that they were making these goods and they found that it was better quality for the same price, or for the same quality they could get lower price, or in many cases they were buying better quality and lower price from Canada. That improves their standard of living. Businesses have more money then that they can allocate to other objectives. Consumers have more money in their pocket. They can buy a greater diversity of goods than they would otherwise have. The whole reason why a lot of American manufacturing has disappeared, despite the fact that it is running at record highs, but the reason why it's not at even higher record highs is because America found that it was advantageous to have other countries in the world do some of the manufacturing for them and trade things like services or high-tech goods that they are better at producing than, say, we could do in Canada. So I totally would disagree with the idea that there's some sort of subsidized approach here that's going on, that the U.S. is keeping Canada afloat through their generosity. It's they get something for it and they're willing to pay for it.
Moishe, thank you very much indeed. Andre here in the studio, Losakung Prietri from the Joint European Disrupt Initiative is itching to say something. Can I just add before, is there a case that perhaps what we've got here is Donald Trump harking back to a time when things were done differently? And I'm thinking of when I was a child. I was brought up in the Liverpool area, North England, and lots of people worked on the docks, like 10,000 people worked on the docks. Then as things were mechanized and computerized and containerized, fewer people worked on the docks and everyone thought it was a big disaster. And I suppose in this sense, for a long time, it was. But eventually you get a situation where Liverpool docks today produce more and handle more goods with so much fewer people because of the way things have changed. Is that something that maybe Donald Trump isn't accepting, that times change, things are different?
Well, I would go in this line to say what really strikes me is that actually Trump, and I know that might not be totally public conventional wisdom here, is that on many topics he's actually right in part. Look at government efficiency. Look at what's going on with DOGE. I mean, even in Europe,
this is the Elon Musk-headed agency,
the
which
Department
is
of Government Efficiency. He's actually right. I mean, in most of our democracies, we bureaucratize. I know that from research and innovation massively. But now he's just overdoing it with a lack of strategy and of strategic thinking. Let's also be very honest.
So there is bureaucracy to cut down on. But say, for instance, the Department of Education is looking after poor students, handicapped students. Perhaps there should be a little bit more sensitivity.
But not by firing 50% of the people of the Department of Education. And on trade too. I mean, since 23 years and WTO, probably some countries, and European Union first, were very naive. Look at how China was a huge, we call that passager clandestin in France. They benefited massively from free trade without really opening their market, forcing joint ventures, and most of the joint ventures ended up in disasters. I mean, we saw. I mean, it was basically once you didn't need your, I'm completely simplifying here, the foreign partner, well, he was out and was not accessing the Chinese market too. So there is something in what he says, but now he's overdoing it and targeting Canada and Europe first, who is the biggest trading partner of the U.S., oldest trading partner in the U.S., is actually completely misguided. And so, unfortunately, he might end up actually having a huge boomerang effect, which we saw, and Fern mentioned that before, in 2018, by targeting very specifically some high-tech industries. Actually, what it created is actually a lot of Chinese industries actually became very innovative under pressure. Huawei, which was banned from the U.S. market, developed its own operating system and is now much more independent from U.S. technology than it used to be. So actually it backfired. It was much better before, when Huawei was really depending on the U.S. market. So all these things are done in a very tactical way. And I think business begins to realize that, because that's maybe my last point. Remember, 2 months ago, the Trump trade, buying dollar, buying Bitcoin, buying Tesla, created huge value. And since a couple of days, you see that actually all this is inverting. Yesterday, there were $1,000 billion lost on the NASDAQ with Tesla losing 15%. The Bitcoin is back to $80,000. So it seems that the red tie of Trump, which was a bit a red button to make money in the last two months, is inverting. And I think this shift might have actually the biggest consequence on him because we saw this picture of him talking to the Business Roundtable. These people will have the biggest pressure on him to change. So we'll see.
Because he prides himself as someone who can do the
who
art
is
of the
part
deal,
of this community.
who can create wealth, who can handle wealth really
Remember
well.
this sentence, you're going to win, you will be tired of winning. Well, right now, most of the stock market in the US is losing, and big time.
Andrew Pietri, thank you very much indeed. JEDI, his organisation, Joint European Disruptive Initiative, thank you for that analysis. Let's cross over to Chunyan Lee, on the other side of our studio, founder of Fader Consulting. Chunyan, the stance that Trump takes, it's very much, sort of the strong man. Is anybody impressed by that, do you think?
In China, do you mean?
Anywhere.
I think in China, the general feeling is that we don't really understand the rationale behind the Trump's, decisions about the trade war launched several years ago, and also about the tariff increase. In China, we perceive him as somebody who is difficult to predict and who changes his ideas, decisions very often. And we don't really understand what's his real goals, objectives behind what he's trying to do these days. Because we have the feeling that he's trying to seek for enemies everywhere. So tariff increase against China, but also other countries. So the world will enter into chaos and more conflicts. So I don't think it's a good, situation. And that's why the other countries, I think, need to collaborate maybe more closely, for example, between China and the EU and other countries, trying to find a solution.
Because the concept of, as Moshe was saying at the very start of this debate, sort of breaking that working relationship with your closest neighbour in terms of commerce,
right?
It doesn't make any sense.
We don't. That's why we don't really understand the rationale behind his decisions, and we already saw his style, several years ago, and the story continues. So let's see.
Chunyan, thank you. Let's bring in again Ryan Young in Chicago, senior economist at the Competitive Enterprise Institute. Ryan, there's a lot of head scratching going on about why Trump is doing what he's doing. Do you have any theories behind this? Is there something we're not seeing?
I think it's personal. Politics is rarely about the merits, and as an economist, this can be incredibly frustrating. Trump with tariffs, one day he'll say it's about trade deficits, the next day he'll say it's about drug trafficking. It might be about raising revenue, it might be about immigration. Who knows? It changes from day to day. If there's a lesson for the world to take from this, I hope it's that the only way to win the trade war is not to play. The only way to win is not to play. America is shooting itself in the foot. And every time someone else retaliates, they're shooting themselves in the foot as well. That can very quickly escalate into something that could be as bad as the Smoot-Hawley tariffs from the Great Depression. Already, if Trump goes through with his reciprocal tariffs, the tariffs in the U.S. could be as high as they ever were since 1946, right when we began that great 80-year liberalization product that got us to a very good place until 2018.
200% tariffs on a bottle of champagne. Now, we all like champagne, I'm sure. I'm off it for the time being because it's Lent. But that kind of move, I mean, it says so much about what's actually going on in his head, doesn't it? It seems incredibly, at the same time, authoritarian and petty.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. He pays attention to the stock market as an economic indicator. That's a little unusual. And we're seeing a little bit of a natural experiment right now. With the stock market tanking, is he going to follow that indicator, or is he going to follow his I like tariffs gut instinct? My fear is that the gut instinct will win out, and the remarks that you ran a minute ago about him going through with the April 2 reciprocal tariffs seems to point in that direction. It's petty, it's authoritarian because he's not involving Congress. In the American system of government, the Constitution grants all taxing power to Congress and none to the executive branch. Over the years, Congress delegated bits and pieces of that taxing authority to the president, and that is now being abused beyond recognition. And Congress is rolling over. I don't think they're going to do anything.
So Trump throwing his weight around, and we're all going to pay the price. Ryan, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. Let's take a listen to Donald Trump again from that briefing with Mark Rutte, who barely got a word in. Excuse me. Mark Rutte, of course, the Secretary General of NATO, who's there to have important talks with Donald Trump at the White House. Trump taking advantage of the situation to make many, many points of which we can't treat here. But homing in on the tariff thing, we heard what he said about Canada. Let's not hear what he said about Europe.
You know, if you look at Europe, take a look at the EU. We're not allowed to sell cars there. It's prohibitive because of their policies. And also their non-monetary tariffs. They put obstacles in your way that you can do nothing about. But if you take a look at what happens, so we sell no cars to Europe. I mean, virtually no cars. And they sell millions of cars to us. They don't take our agriculture, we take their agriculture. It's like a one-way street with them.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but you can buy an American car in Europe. I know certainly you can buy an American motorcycle because I drive past a Harley Davidson concession on my way into work. So what's he talking about, Andre?
Well, as always, data and facts are, there is an alternative reality to that. The fact that for a long time, European car makers were definitely dominating from a technological point of view, marketing point of view, was the reason why, obviously, there was an imbalance in the trade. And look also how many US car companies have been taken over. I mean, think about Chrysler in the past. Now, unfortunately, both for the US and for Europe, the big rise is currently coming from China. But again, on the US side, he seems to forget that, for example, a car company like Tesla has a majority share in electric car sales. I mean, think about a country like Norway. I'm not sure about the exact number, but it's probably 50% of the cars that are sold by Tesla in the single country, which is much more advanced. So, yes, facts are not right. On agriculture that he's mentioning, this has mostly to do with also environmental topics, especially linked with pesticides and things like that, where obviously there are criteria set by the European Union which are non-tariff barriers, indeed, but which are more because we are convinced that some of the products that you see in US agriculture are not necessarily safe, and this is the reason why there's a thing. But there's a lot of frustration, it seems. It's clearly also a question of competitiveness. And the picture is not actually that rosy for the Europeans either, because we saw in the last couple of years what Biden put in place, and obviously Trump hates everything what Joe Biden did before. The Inflation Reduction Act was actually a very, very powerful attraction for European projects and industries to actually invest. And here again, he's shooting itself in the foot. What I understand is that everything which is now RA is either, what has not been decided is now frozen, and the budgets are gone. Okay. So difficult to understand. I think it's the typical. There has been a lot of philosophy or psychology discussion about Donald Trump, but he probably handles always in the destabilization of the people in front of him, journalists, trade partners. And that works in some way. In a world which is used to predictability, those who are setting the agenda are often those who win, unless it becomes self-inflicting. And this is what the territory we are entering.
So disruption can be a good thing, but sometimes it can
in a negotiation, and that's how mafia bosses behave too. Huh? So sometimes you have the impression that is the kind of bullying that you see. This is playing soft has never worked well in the underworld.
An interesting observation, Andre Losa-Krug-Pietri of the Joint
And that's why,
European Disruptive Initiative.
I think, you mentioned the cap. I think it's also up to the democracies to be able to take radical, bold decisions. I think we should not leave it either to populist or more authoritarian leaders, which seems to be the tendency that Trump is following. We need to have the center, the liberal, the humanist, taking back and being as bold also. We cannot play soft on that.
Andre, for now, thank you. Let's bring back in Moshe Launder from Calgary, Canada. And Ryan Young, who wasn't with us, but now he's back, I'm pleased to say. Ryan, who's in Chicago. Moshe, starting with you, the issue of cars. Cars these days are made in several different locations, aren't they? So to say that, we have our cars and we can't sell them there, it's a nonsensical statement, is it not?
It was a major stumbling block in trying to create the free trade agreement in North America as to what exactly constitutes North American content, let alone trying to figure out what's Canadian content or American content, given that a car would pass forth across the border numerous times before it becomes a finished product. Who's to say exactly how much of it is Canadian, how much of it is American? And of course, in Canada, along the main highway leading to Detroit, you'll have Korean automakers, Japanese automakers, American automakers, German automakers, and not everybody who's working in those factories is necessarily Canadian citizens. You can have Europeans that are working there. And so how exactly do you figure out what exactly is Canadian content? Part of it was just a fudge where we said, well, as long as we can establish this minimum amount, we'll leave it tariff-free. But the fact is that in an integrated world like today, it's impossible to say, even within your cell phone, how much of that technology is coming from what country, and how much of the human capital and the brains is embedded in there. So it's a made-up exercise to merely justify that if he wants to create some target and he wants some justification to throw the press off on some wild goose chase, he makes up some story, and while everybody's trying to fish out what the truth is and fact check, which is now becoming an industry in its own right, he's creating problems in some other industry. And it's almost like the more chaos and confusion that he can create, the more that whatever maybe his underlying agenda is, he can pursue, because we're too busy trying to figure out, well, what did he just say? And sometimes that's why the messaging is so inconsistent. It's almost by design. I won't give him credit for that, because I would think that that requires some level of strategy that I don't think he has. But I think that maybe the people that are behind him have realized that he's the perfect mouthpiece for them, in that trying to pursue that agenda, this is the perfect person to create all of that confusion and misunderstanding, and to take facts and figures and bend them in the way that he wants.
I can't help but imagine that there must be someone, Moishe, behind the scenes who's profiting from all of this.
Well, and that's it, right? Mostly the expectation of any political leader is that you divest yourself of your business interests, or at least what you do is you hand it to a blind trust. What happens now is he hasn't given up that blind trust, and he continues to retain control over it. So it's not to say that there's insider trading that's going on, but does he understand what he's about to say in the afternoon? And is he moving his portfolio in a way that he can advantage himself from the dips and rises in the stock market? And of course, the people around him have said, well, if the president doesn't have to put his assets in a blind trust, why do we? And we're seeing increasingly in Congress that a variety of American leaders have decided that they'll continue to run their business empires, and most of them are millionaires, and they're probably profiting from this confusion as well, because at least they know what confusion is going to come next.
Moishe, thank you for the moment. Let's go to Ryan in Chicago, senior economist at the Competitive Enterprise Institute. Ryan Young, great to see you back with us, sir. Did you see I'll call it a press briefing, Trump, Elon Musk, Tesla cars at the White House? We took it live for a period of time. It came back to me and I said, look, I apologized to the viewers and said, look, we were expecting a comment on Ukraine or something pertinent to world news, but what we got was an advert for Tesla cars and for Elon Musk. And I felt that was almost an abuse of the office of the President of the United States. What would you think about that?
There's ample precedent for that. Congress has been full of insider trading from both parties since at least the 1800s. Trump has been more flagrant about it than most. During his first term, he had that hotel that was jam-packed with lobbyists and political people seeking political favors from him. I think we're seeing some more of that everywhere, from promoting his friends' businesses to some cryptocurrency initiative he's now undergoing. But I'm really wary of conspiracy theories. While he doesn't have coherent stances on a lot of issues, tariffs are something he feels in his bones. And that's only true of a few issues like tariffs and with immigration. And he's even said as much, in finally acknowledging that tariffs are a self-harming policy for the U.S. He said it'll be worth some pain to get the tariffs in. We'll be better off in the long run. I don't believe that. I don't even know if he believes that or not, but he just likes tariffs. There's some block that his advisors cannot overcome to let him realize that they are going to harm his own interests as well as the nation's interests.
Tariff, the most beautiful word in the dictionary, is what Donald Trump has repeated on many occasions. Ryan, bear with us, sir. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Chunyan Lee has many things to say, many things to add. I know you're eager to get in and contribute on this one. But can I start by asking you, to kind of give us a sense of how China does business. I mean, the growth of Chinese business in, say, Africa has been huge over the past few decades. Give us a sense of how China does business in comparison to what Donald Trump is actually now setting up.
You mean the growth objective or trends of China? Currently, Chinese economy faces much pressure. But I think in the short and medium and long term, I still think that Chinese economy has much potential. If we look at the number of the large companies, Western companies still present in the Chinese market, and which still have some long-term strategy over there, we can believe that in the medium and long term, we still see many opportunities in China, and specifically in some key industries like the AI and other high-tech industries. So I think, if Trump really wants to increase tariffs against China, China still has some cards to play. For example, China is the largest market for the American farmers. And China's coal imports from the USA accounted for 20.8% of the total coal exports of the USA last year. And China is also the largest liquefied natural gas market in the world. So I think if really Trump continues in this direction, it will harm not only the economy of both countries, but also the global economy. Because if there is a slowdown of Chinese economy, it will also impact negatively the global economy growth.
Washington's always had this issue about the trade deficit between the US and China. And clearly that is something that I presume isn't changing.
No, but I think this is not really the objective of China. It's a consequence. Due to the economy structure, the trade and the needs and demand in different countries. That's because, we have the made in China products, which have a relatively good price and quality ratio. And American people need that. And also it's the case in the other countries. So we can always negotiate about the conditions of the global trade, but it's not objective pursued by China. And I think if there was a trade deficit, that also means that people in these countries, they have a need, they have demand on that.
So to commerce, the Chinese approach very different, Andre, to what Donald Trump is doing. Does Europe need to be more like China in how it does business? Does Europe need to start looking to make friends away from the United States?
Well, I think we need to have a strategy on industry. Just to remind you a number which is really striking, and again, on what I mentioned before, there is something right in some of the strategies of the US. In 2000, the US was representing 25% of industrial output, and today we realize that industry and research, innovation, goes hand in hand. If you don't have research, you don't have industry very soon, and the opposite is true. And China was 6%. In 2030, so in 4 years, the UN predicts that China will concentrate 45% of global production, and the US only 11%, and Europe also has retreated. So if we believe that we need to have strong industry to be resilient, and we see that right now in the fragmentation of the world, we saw that during COVID, where supply chain were so stretched that it was a huge weakness on our industries. Think about automotive, and of course on vaccines, masks, and etc. And if we believe that innovation is the key for the future, we need to reshore. And I think the initial strategy by the Biden administration, which was not necessarily very friendly to it was more nice and friendly on the outside, but it was very strategic and not necessarily friendly to the Europeans, was to reshore a lot in a very strategic manner. Semiconductors, automotive, key components, rare materials, mines, etc. This is the kind of strategy we need to apply in Europe. So we need to go. So all that you hear in the speeches, you see very little execution. And if I have one worry on Europe today, to answer specifically your question, is that 3 months ago, the industrial agenda was top of the mind. Remember, Draghi report, competitiveness. It seems that now all the commissioners, I see that tomorrow you will have the Commissioner for Defense who will be here in France 24. Everybody seems to become generals, right? But we should not forget that the key for defense will be a strong industry. And so I think Donald Trump is overplaying it very erratically. Europe has an opportunity to be super strategic and super much focused on execution. Hopefully, I will see in a couple of weeks that happens.
Thank you very much indeed. We're out of time, but I've got to get two final comments. First from Moshe Landa. Moshe, over there in Canada, do you see a situation where the US becomes so isolated on the world stage, commercially, economically, that basically it reduces its influence?
It's possible. I think what the Americans will realize is that when Donald Trump says we don't need them, that's referring to Canada, but it could be any country. Yeah, they do. And there's going to be a point where whether it's a recession, whether it's continued high inflation, the inability to reduce interest rates and stimulate the economy, he's going to realize that he needs those friends. And the problem is that if he's nasty to them now, it's not in his nature to come crawling back. So how exactly are they going to square this circle at some point in the future? Canadians will remember this for years to come, but we also recognize that at least on this side of the border, we need the Americans, and we need them to be part of an integrated North American economy, and we can't do it alone. And if we don't have the U.S. By our side, we have 3 oceans surrounding us. And so that means that we need to be pursuing free trade agreements and not being as complacent. Americans, because they have a slightly larger economy, maybe have a little bit of a time delay that they can work with before they come to that realization as well. But if they're not working with Canada on one side, and if they're isolating themselves from Mexico on the other, they also then have the same geographical problems, which is you have to reach across the Atlantic, you have to reach across the Pacific, and better to not burn those bridges before it's too late.
Ryan, can you be brief in Chicago? If you could whisper into Trump's ear, what would you say?
I would say 2 things. First is we need to re-embrace the separation of powers. Congress needs to retake that taxing authority that it delegated away to the president and never should have in the first place. The second thing is that America does need the rest of the world. And with Trump violating his own USMCA trade agreement that he himself signed, the rest of the world is seeing what America's word is worth. We're at the point now where we just have to hope that our allies across the world give us a mulligan on what's going on right now and that this is just a temporary situation.
Ryan, thank you very much indeed. Ryan Young of the Competitive Enterprise Institute. Thanks to Moshe Landa of Concordia University. Thank you to Andre Olosa-Krug Pietri of the Joint European Disruptive Initiative. And thanks to Chunyan Lee, founder of Fader Consulting. Thank you for your wise words. Thanks to you all for watching, of course. And stay with us here in France 24. Much more to come.